I am going to give you the ledger. Not a summary, not a general description of what went wrong, but the actual line items in the order they occurred, with the amounts and the reasoning I applied at the time. Before I start, I want to tell you why I am presenting it as a ledger, and not as a story. A story has a narrative arc and an emotional peak, and it implies that the sequence of events was unusual or dramatic. A ledger is a list of transactions. The sequence of events in my case was not unusual or dramatic. It was the sequence of transactions available to a 62-year-old man with 410,000 Australian dollars arriving in Koh Samui with no specific plan and with the general conviction that he had earned the right to spend the money in ways that made him happy. The transactions made him happy, individually. The sum was the problem, and the sum was nobody's responsibility but his. A story would imply that something happened to me. A ledger accurately describes what I did. I present a ledger. I am going to give you the ledger. Not a summary, not a general description of what went wrong, but the actual line items in the order they occurred, with the amounts and the reasoning I applied at the time, because the reasoning is what matters, and the reasoning, in each case, was sound. This is the thing I need you to hear before I give you anything else. Every decision I made was a reasonable decision, given the information available to me at the time I made it. Nobody cheated me. Nobody lied to me. Nobody told me to do any of the things I did. The ledger is mine, entirely, and the total at the bottom is what it is. And the total is, I arrived in Koh Samui in 2018 with 410,000 Australian dollars, and I now have approximately 62,000, and I am 67 years old. And the 62,000 needs to last the rest of my life on top of my Australian pension, and the calculation of whether that works depends on how long the rest of my life is, and I have decided not to calculate it because the calculation does not change anything and produces in me a specific anxiety that I find unproductive. My name is Warren. I am 67, I am from Perth, and I spent 31 years as a mining operations supervisor in Western Australia. I want to give you the 31 years before the ledger, because the 31 years explain the amount at the top of the ledger and the mindset of the man who spent it. Western Australian mining in the period I worked, the Pilbara iron ore operations, the gold sites in the goldfields, a 5-year stint on a nickel operation in the eastern goldfields that I found the most technically demanding and the most personally expensive work of my career, in the sense of what it cost in time away from home, was an industry that produced, for its supervisory staff, an income that was designed to compensate for the conditions, and the conditions were genuinely difficult. Remote sites accessible only by air, 2-week on 2-week off rosters that erased the boundary between work and rest, a physical and cognitive intensity that is hard to describe to someone who has not managed a large-scale extraction operation. The income was real, and I saved most of it, which was the specific habit of a man who grew up in Rockingham, south of Perth, in a household where money was not abundant and where the absence of money was a daily fact rather than an occasional embarrassment, and who decided at 22 that he was going to ensure the absence of money was not a feature of his adult life. It was not a feature of my adult life. The 31 years produced the $410,000 and the house in the northern suburbs, and 3 children who are grown and living their own Perth lives, and who I tell about Koh Samui in the way that parents describe their retirement to children who are busy with their own schedules, which is, briefly, and without the details that would worry them. My eldest, Carla, is 42 and a physiotherapist in Fremantle, and she has the specific quality of her mother's directness. Her mother and I divorced in 2009, which is a fact I mention because it is in the cost history of my 50s, and because the divorce settlement is not in the ledger because it preceded the ledger and was handled correctly. And she asked me, on a video call in 2023, whether I was okay financially. I said I was managing. She said, "Dad, are you actually okay?" I said I had more than enough to live on, which is true. She said, "I'm going to ask you again in 6 months." I said she could. She has not, which tells me she is watching without pressing, which is the kind of parenting that children provide to parents when they understand the situation and have decided to let the parent manage it. I love Carla for this and for most other things. My name is Warren. I am 67, I am from Perth, and I spent 31 years as a mining operations supervisor in Western Australia. Mining operations supervisors in Western Australia in the period 2000 to 2018 were, in the specific language of the industry, well compensated. The compensation reflected the conditions, the remote sites, the fly-in, fly-out rosters, the physical demands of running operations that ran 24 hours and that stopped for nothing, including the supervisor's preference for sleep. I saved well. I invested reasonably. I owned a house in the northern suburbs of Perth that I sold in 2018 when I retired, and that produced, after the mortgage, approximately $280,000 of the $410. The rest was superannuation and savings. I went to Koh Samui in 2018 on a recommendation from a mate who had been living there for 3 years, and I stayed because Koh Samui was exactly what I wanted, which was warm and beautiful and less complicated than Perth, and I had earned the warmth and the beauty, and I was not wrong about having earned them. Line item 1. The villa. I rented a villa on the northeast coast of the island in the first month because it was available and because the price was, at the time, within what I had decided I could afford, and because the specific villa, private pool, sea view, elevated above the road on a hill with a garden that the rental agent described as mature, which turned out to be accurate in the sense that the garden was very large and required a gardener, which I had not factored in, was the kind of place I had spent 31 years telling myself I would eventually be able to live in. Let me give you the reasoning that produced 4.5 years of the villa rather than 2. Because the reasoning is the thing I most want to account for. In the first year at the villa, I calculated the monthly shortfall, the difference between the pension and the rent, and I found it manageable, and I told myself I would reassess in year 2. In year 2, I reassessed, and I found the shortfall still manageable, and the villa still the villa, which is to say, still the specific beautiful place that a man from Rockingham who spent 31 years on mine sites had earned, and I told myself I would reassess in year 3. In year 3, the restaurant investment had not yet revealed its outcome, the crypto investment had not yet declined, and the boat was still producing the specific pleasure I had purchased it to produce, and the villa was still the villa, and I told myself I would reassess at the end of the 3rd year. At the end of the 3rd year, the boat cost calculation had surfaced, and the restaurant situation was becoming clear, and I told myself I would stay 1 more year and then move, and the 1 more year became 1 more year again, and by the time I moved it was 4.5 years. The sequence is, I will reassess. Then, I reassess and find the situation manageable. Then, I will reassess again. This is not inertia. This is the specific behavior of a man who has worked in an industry where the operating assumption is that a thing that is running is a thing that can continue to run, and where stopping a thing that is running requires a significant event to justify it, and where the absence of a significant event is evidence that the running can continue. The villa was running. The running cost me 4.5 years of shortfall. The shortfall was the price of the having earned it. Line item 1. The villa. I rented a villa on the northeast coast of the island in the first month because it was available and because the price was within what I had decided I could afford. The monthly rent was 62,000 baht. At the exchange rate of mid-2018, that was approximately 2,400 Australian dollars per month. My pension, at that time, was about 3,000 Australian dollars per month. The villa cost 80% of my monthly pension. I funded the difference, approximately $600 a month, from savings. This seemed, in August 2018, sustainable. $410,000 at $600 a month shortfall is 57 years of shortfall coverage. I was not going to live 57 years. The arithmetic was sound. What the arithmetic did not account for was that the villa was the first line item and not the last. Line item 2. The boat. I had wanted a boat since approximately 1985. I had never had a boat in Perth because the Perth housing market and the school fees for 3 children and the general consumption of a suburban life had consumed the money that would have produced a boat. I want to describe the boat in the honesty it deserves, because the boat is the line item I am most conflicted about, which is not the same as the line item I most regret. I used the boat approximately 40 times in the 3 years I owned it. The 40 times include the first 6 or 7 outings in the first 2 months, which were as good as anything I have done in my life. Early morning departures from the marina, the Gulf at that hour a specific color that Perth does not produce, snorkeling at sites that a person from Western Australia finds immediately and specifically meaningful, because they contain life at a density and a color that the Perth metropolitan waters do not. And then, as the novelty of having a boat became the possession of a boat, a gradual reduction in frequency to perhaps once a fortnight, then once a month, then the specific period where I was going to take the boat out this weekend, and then the weekend passed. The boat was maintained whether I used it or not. The mooring fees were paid whether I used it or not. The marine engine service in month 4 cost 45,000 baht for work I could not have deferred without risking a more expensive failure. The first year all-in cost was approximately 45,000 Australian dollars, including the purchase price. The 40 hours of use in the first year represents a cost per hour of approximately 1,100 Australian dollars. I made the hour cost calculation 8 months into owning the boat, on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen table in the villa, and the number produced in me a specific and useful emotion, which was not regret, but clarity. I was not a boat owner. I was a man who had bought a boat. The distinction mattered. The man who buys a boat and does not become a boat owner should sell the boat. I sold the boat 14 months after buying it. I recovered 290,000 baht, approximately 30% less than I paid for it. The net loss on the boat, including all operating costs, was approximately 26,000 Australian dollars. I include this in the ledger under line item 2. I do not include the 40 hours, which were not in the $40,000 range of value, but which were the specific hours I would have paid a significant premium to have had. I still think about the early morning Gulf in October. I want to add something about the boat that is not in the line item analysis, and that is in the honest accounting. The boat provided me, across 40 hours of use, the specific experience of being a man who had a boat, which is different from the experience of being a man on a boat, and which is a distinction I did not understand before I was in it. Being a man who has a boat produces in the man a specific quality of permission, the permission to go out on the water when the conditions are right, to plan a Saturday around the tide, to mention the boat in conversation with the casual ownership of a person for whom boat having is a feature of their life. I had this permission for 3 years. The permission cost approximately 300 Australian dollars per hour of use, and I would pay it again for the first 20 hours, and I would not pay it for the second 20. That is the analysis. The early morning Gulf in October, priceless in the genuine sense, which is that no price I could assign it would be accurate, because the experience belongs to a category of experience that was not available to me in 31 years of mine sites, and the category includes beauty that you are inside rather than observing from a distance, and quiet that is the quiet of open water rather than the absence of the machinery noise that was always present on the sites, and the specific quality of a morning when you are where you have earned the right to be. I had earned the right to be on the water in October on the Gulf of Thailand. I paid approximately $300 an hour to exercise that right. The right was worth it. The duration was not. I still think about the early morning Gulf in October. Line item 2. The boat. I had wanted a boat since approximately 1985. I had never had a boat in Perth because the Perth housing market and the school fees for 3 children and the general consumption of a suburban life had consumed the money that would have produced a boat. And by the time the children were grown and the mortgage was shrinking, I had made peace with the fact that I was not going to have a boat in Perth. Koh Samui has one of the most accessible recreational diving and snorkeling environments in Southeast Asia, and the waters around the Gulf of Thailand coast are something that a person from Western Australia, who has spent his life looking at the ocean from a distance, finds immediately compelling. I want to be specific about what immediately compelling meant in October 2018, because the compellingness produced the decision, and the decision is line item 2, and I want to give the compellingness its due before I give you the accounting. I went snorkeling on my third day on the island, off a beach near the villa, with equipment rented from a shop on the road. The water was warm in the specific way that Gulf water is warm, which is warm without being the soup that some tropical waters are. Warm in a way that allows you to stay in it for an extended period without discomfort. The reef was 40 meters offshore, approximately 2 meters deep, and it had the specific quality of a reef that has been treated with reasonable care. It was not pristine, because few accessible reefs near inhabited islands are pristine, but it was alive, and the aliveness was the thing. I spent an hour in the water on that first day, and came out and said, to nobody in particular, because there was nobody particular nearby, I am getting a boat. This is not a sensible thing to say on your third day in a country. I said it anyway. The boat followed 3 weeks later, when the expat who was leaving came to my attention through Roger. Koh Samui has one of the most accessible recreational diving and snorkeling environments in Southeast Asia, and the waters around the Gulf of Thailand coast are something that a person from Western Australia finds immediately compelling. In October 2018, 2 months after arriving, I purchased a used fiberglass speedboat from an expat who was leaving the island. The purchase price was 450,000 baht, approximately 17,500 Australian dollars. The ongoing costs, mooring fees, fuel, maintenance, the marine engine service that became necessary 4 months after purchase, totaled approximately 12,000 Australian dollars in the first year. The boat gave me approximately 40 hours of use in the first year, which makes the first year cost of the boat approximately 300 Australian dollars per hour of use, which is a number I would not have accepted if I had calculated it before the purchase, and that I calculated approximately 8 months after the purchase when I was reviewing the accounts and found the number alarming, and then found it funny, which is the specific emotional sequence available to a man who has made an expensive mistake and who has a sense of humor about expensive mistakes. Line item 3. The restaurant investment. A friend I made on the island in the first 6 months. A British man named Roger who had been in Koh Samui for 8 years and who knew the island well in the way of a man who had made several mistakes on it and had learned from most of them, introduced me to a Thai businesswoman named Koh Samui who was looking for a co-investor in a beachfront restaurant expansion. I need to give you Roger more precisely, because Roger is the most important person in this story, who did nothing wrong and who nonetheless deserves his chapter. Roger had been in Koh Samui since 2010, when he retired from a property development business in Bristol and moved with the specific decisiveness of a man who had decided and did not need to revisit the decision. He had been through 2 significant financial disappointments on the island. One involving a boat hire business that he had invested in and that had dissolved in the Thai legal system with his money still inside it, and one involving a property development that had been, in the Thai legal sense, correctly structured and that had produced no return, and he spoke about both with the rueful honesty of a man who had updated his mental model of how Koh Samui investment worked, and who did not hold the experiences against the island, or against the specific people who had been their protagonists. He was a good friend. When he introduced me to Koh Samui, he said, I have looked at this and I think it is a genuine opportunity, and I think you should do your own due diligence, and I think there is real risk, and this is the opportunity available given the risk. This is a responsible introduction. I did my own due diligence. I visited the restaurant 4 times over 3 weeks. I ate there twice. I spoke with 2 other expats who were regular customers, and I reviewed the financial figures that Koh Samui shared with me for the preceding 4 years. The figures were real. I subsequently confirmed this through a Thai accountant who reviewed them at my request. The opportunity was genuine. The investment produced the outcome it produced. Roger has not said anything to me about it since the outcome became clear, because Roger is a man who knows when not to say things, and the not saying is one of the reasons I value his friendship. Line item 3. The restaurant investment. A friend I made on the island in the first 6 months, a British man named Roger, who had been in Koh Samui for 8 years, and who knew the island well in the way of a man who had made several mistakes on it and had learned from most of them, introduced me to a Thai businesswoman named Koh Samui, who was looking for a co-investor in a beachfront restaurant expansion. The restaurant was real. It had been operating for 4 years. It had a Thai following and a growing tourist following, and a location on a beach that received a specific quality of late afternoon light that made the photographs on the menu look exactly like the photographs on the menu actually looked when you were sitting there, which is unusual. Koh Samui wanted to expand the seating from 60 to 120, add a bar, and invest in a proper kitchen. She was asking for 800,000 baht from a foreign co-investor in exchange for a 23% stake. 800,000 baht was approximately 31,000 Australian dollars. I invested. The restaurant expanded. The expansion took approximately 5 months, longer than Koh Samui had projected, which is the first project management data point I should have weighted more heavily but did not, because the expansion costs were her costs and not mine, and the delay did not directly cost me money. The expanded space was, as I described, larger and less charming. The additional seating had been added in a section that was slightly less sheltered from the road noise than the original terrace, and the kitchen upgrade had been accompanied by a menu redesign that was more ambitious and slightly less Thai. And the combination of these decisions had produced a restaurant that was chasing a demographic: the Instagram tourist, the resort guest, the couple wanting an occasion, rather than serving the demographic that had sustained it, which was Thai families, the island's residential population, and the long-stay expats, who knew about it because it had been good for 4 years. The tourist demographic is fickle and abundant, and responds quickly to visual cues and slowly to quality cues, which means it fills a beautiful new space in the first 6 months, and redistributes to the next beautiful new space in the next 6 months. The Thai demographic is steady and responds to quality and loyalty, but it responds to a 40% price increase in the menu, which the expanded kitchen had necessitated, with a quiet redistribution of its own, toward the places it had known before the expansion changed things. By the end of the 2nd year of the expansion, Koh Samui and I had a conversation in which she was precise and direct about the financial position. The revenue was down, the distributions were not possible, she was managing the core business, the expansion had not produced what she had planned. I said I understood. She said she was sorry. I said she had nothing to apologize for. I meant it. The restaurant expanded. The expansion produced a larger space that was more impressive and less charming, and the tourist following discovered this faster than the Thai following and began to redistribute toward the other beachfront options on the island, of which there are many. By the end of the 2nd year of the expansion, the restaurant's revenue had decreased by approximately 30% from its peak, and the distribution from my 23% stake had ceased. And Koh Samui, whom I continue to see occasionally, and who is a genuinely competent businesswoman who made a decision that the market did not reward, had no particular obligation to return my capital, which she did not. Line item 4. The cryptocurrency. This one I am going to describe with the specific embarrassment it deserves, because the embarrassment is honest, and the honesty is the point. In late 2020, during the period when the villa was still the villa, and the boat was still on the mooring, and the restaurant had not yet revealed its full situation, the combination of global lockdown conditions and a great deal of time on Koh Samui produced in me a specific state of cognitive openness to investment opportunities that I would not, in the mining site context, have found credible. A man I had met at a bar, not a friend, an acquaintance, described an opportunity in a cryptocurrency investment platform that had produced, he said, returns of 40% in the preceding 6 months. I had 25,000 Australian dollars in a savings account in Perth that was producing 0.4%. The comparison was not difficult. I transferred 25,000 Australian dollars into the cryptocurrency platform in January 2021, By June 2021, the value had risen to approximately 38,000 Australian dollars. By February 2022, the value had fallen to approximately 9,000 Australian dollars. By October 2022, the platform announced operational difficulties and suspended withdrawals. I recovered approximately 3,000 Australian dollars through the withdrawal window before the suspension. The 22,000 Australian dollar loss is in the ledger under line item 4. I want to describe the experience of watching the crypto value decline because the experience is informative and because I know I am not the only man who has had it. Between the January 2021 purchase and the June 2021 peak, I checked the platform approximately twice a week, and each check produced a number that was larger than the previous number, and the larger number produced a specific feeling that I want to describe accurately, which is the feeling of a man who made a good decision. This is the feeling that volatile markets produce when they are rising, and it is the feeling that causes men to hold through the subsequent decline, because the feeling of having made a good decision is very difficult to voluntarily convert into the feeling of having taken a loss. Between the June 2021 peak and the February 2022 low, I checked approximately every 3 days, and each check produced a number that was smaller than the previous number, and at each stage I held because the decline seemed temporary, because the man who introduced me to the platform had said he had seen declines before and they reversed, and because the specific psychology of loss aversion, the well-documented human preference for not realizing a loss, was operating on me as effectively as it operates on everyone, which is to say, very effectively. I know this. I understand the mechanism. Understanding the mechanism did not protect me from the mechanism. I recovered approximately 3,000 Australian dollars. The 22,000 is in the ledger, and nobody cheated me. The platform was not, as far as I have been able to determine, a deliberate fraud. It was a genuine investment in a volatile asset class that performed in exactly the way that volatile asset classes perform when the market turns. And I had made no exit plan and had held through the decline in the way that optimists hold through declines, which is to say I had believed, at each stage of the decline, that the decline was temporary, and it was not temporary, and the 22,000 is in the ledger. Line item 5. The villa. I know I listed the villa as line item 1, and I am listing it again as line item 5, because the villa produced 2 line items: the monthly shortfall that accumulated over 4.5 years, and the deposit that I lost when I ended the lease before the term. The total monthly shortfall over the 4.5 years at the villa was approximately 32,400 Australian dollars. Taking into account the exchange rate movements that made the baht cost somewhat more in dollar terms in the later years than in the earlier ones. The deposit I lost when I ended the lease was 4 months' rent, 248,000 baht, approximately 9,500 Australian dollars. The villa was excellent. I do not regret the villa in the way that I regret some of the other items. I regret the duration. I should have stayed 2 years and moved to a more sustainable rental. I stayed 4.5 years because I had told myself, in 2018, that I had earned the villa, and the having earned it felt like it should last longer than 2 years. I had earned it. 2 years would have been sufficient. 4.5 years was what the earning produced in the absence of a plan, and the absence of a plan is the specific thing I would change if I were doing this again. Line item 6. The years after the villa. I moved from the villa to a rental apartment in Chaweng in 2022, at 14,000 baht a month, which is a manageable rent for a retiree on an Australian pension in Koh Samui, if the other costs are controlled and if the savings pool is sufficient. My savings pool at the point of moving was not what I would have chosen it to be. The calculation I have not made, the one about how long the 62,000 will last, is one that any honest accountant would make and report in a way I would prefer not to receive. I have made a version of it in my head which says, if I live to 83, the Australian male median life expectancy, and if the pension holds at current value, and if I conserve the remaining savings, I will have something at the end. The something is not large. The something is what the ledger produced. The ledger is mine. Every item was my decision. The decisions were reasonable. The total is what it is. Let me give you the bottom of the ledger precisely, because I have given you the line items and I should give you the sum. Approximate figures. Villa shortfall and deposit, a $42,000. Boat net loss, a $26,000. Restaurant, a $31,000. Crypto, a $22,000. Other smaller items, a $12,000. Total spent beyond what I should have spent, approximately a $133,000. Remaining, a $62,000. The arithmetic checks. The shortfall is the ledger. The ledger is complete. I want to give you what the ledger teaches before I give you the accounting at the bottom, because the teaching is the reason I am presenting the ledger in this format. The ledger teaches, item by item, a single lesson that I could have stated before starting. Each reasonable decision existed within the context of every other reasonable decision that had already been made, and the context was not in the individual decision's calculation. The villa was reasonable given the pension and the savings. The boat was reasonable given the villa and the savings and the 40 hours of the Gulf in October. The restaurant was reasonable given the due diligence and the introduction and the genuine opportunity. The crypto was reasonable given the comparison to 0.4% and the specific optimism of 2020. Each item was reasonable given what had already been spent. The total was not reasonable given the savings pool. The total was what the items produced when summed, without a running tally that anyone was watching. I was not watching the running tally. I was making individual reasonable decisions. A mining operations supervisor who manages a site budget knows that line items that are individually within tolerance can collectively exceed the project budget, and that the role of the budget manager is to watch the running total and not just the individual lines. I did not apply this to my personal finances. The ledger is the result. Line item 6. The years after the villa. I moved from the villa to a rental apartment in Chao Wang in 2022 at 14,000 baht a month. The calculation I have not made, the one about how long the 62,000 will last, is one that any honest accountant would make and report in a way I would prefer not to receive. The version in my head says, if I live to 83, which is the Australian male median life expectancy for a man of my current age, and if the pension continues at its current value, and if the remaining savings are conserved at a return that beats inflation, I will have something at the end. The something is not large. The something is not what I expected to have at the end. The something is what the ledger produced, and the ledger is mine, and every item in it was a decision I made freely, and the decisions were reasonable, and the total is what it is. I want to tell you what the men I know here think of the ledger, because the community matters, and its response matters for the recording. There are approximately 8 men I interact with any regularity on Koh Samui. I say approximately because the community here is porous and the regularity of the interaction varies. They range from Roger, who has been here longest, to a German man named Klaus, who arrived last year, and who is still in the phase of finding everything remarkable, which is a phase I remember, and which I watch with the mixed feelings of a man who has information that would be useful, and who has not been asked for it. I have not told most of them the specific details of the ledger. Roger knows, because Roger knows most things, and his response was, "You bought a boat, you had a good time on the boat, you sold it." I said I also lost $26,000 on it. He said, "You had a good time on the boat." He was right. And his being right is the most useful version of the ledger that anyone has offered me. The boat was the best item in the ledger and the worst investment in the ledger, and the two things are not contradictions. And holding both of them simultaneously is the condition of the man who has the ledger and also had the boat. And the condition is fine. I want to say one more thing, because the ledger should not be the whole of the account. Let me give you Koh Samui before the final accounting, because the island deserves an honest description and not only the context of my ledger. Koh Samui is an island in the Gulf of Thailand that has been marketed as a tourist destination for 40 years, and that has, as a consequence of 40 years of tourist attention, developed an infrastructure of restaurants and resorts and beaches that is excellent for tourism and that contains, inside it, an island that Thai people have been living on for considerably longer than 40 years, and that has, in its interior and its less tourist-adjacent zones, the specific character of a place that has not been performing for an audience. The northeast coast, where I spent the first 4.5 years, is the island's quietest coast. Not the developed resort coast of Chao Wang and Lamai, not the backpacker-adjacent south, but the northeast, which has a road and a few restaurants, and the beach, and a quality of light and air that I will describe as exactly what I needed, and approximately nothing else. The Chao Wang apartment, which I moved to in 2022 and where I now live, is in the island's commercial center, and the commercial center is noisier and busier and less beautiful than the northeast coast, and 12,000 baht a month cheaper, and 8 minutes from the beach where the restaurant is. I go to the beach most mornings. I have been going to the beach most mornings for 6 years. The beach is still the beach. The light is still the light. The ledger is what the ledger is, and the light is what it is, and both of those things are simultaneously true. And the simultaneous truth of them is the condition I am living in, and the condition is sustainable, and I am still here. I want to say one more thing, because the ledger should not be the whole of the account. Koh Samui is still beautiful. The late afternoon light on the beach near the restaurant, the one with the 23% steak, is still the specific quality of light that made the menu photographs accurate, and I still go to that beach. And I still sometimes sit at a table at the restaurant, and Koh Samui still brings me the dish I like without my ordering it, because I have been coming to the restaurant since before the expansion, and I am the kind of regular that a restaurant with a Thai following values, which is the kind of regular who is there in the off-season and who tips correctly. I have 31 years of savings in a $62,000 savings account and a pension and a life in Koh Samui that costs me 14,000 baht a month, and that is, by the measure of whether I want to be here tomorrow, exactly right. The ledger is complete. The mirror is closed. The boat is sold. I want to end with the thing the ledger would tell a man who is about to arrive in Koh Samui, or anywhere in Thailand, with a savings pool and a pension, and the conviction that he has earned the right to spend on things that make him happy. The conviction is correct. The spending is legitimate. What the ledger recommends, based on 6 line items and a $133,000 of surplus expenditure, is this. Keep a running total. Not a line item review, which is what I did, and which allowed each item to appear reasonable in isolation. A running total. How much have I spent from capital in the last 12 months? What is the gap between that spending and the sustainable spending rate I have calculated? If the gap is positive, if I am spending more than I should be sustaining, what is the item I would eliminate first if I had to, and is the item providing value proportional to its cost? The boat provided value proportional to its cost in the first month and not in the next 14 months. If I had run the running total and the item review at month 6, I would have sold the boat at month 6. I would have recovered more of the purchase price and eliminated 12 months of operating costs and been a $15,000 better off than I am, which is not nothing. Keep the running total. Every quarter, the individual items will tell you they are reasonable. The running total will tell you the truth. The ledger is complete. The mirror is closed. The boat is sold. I am 67. My pension is approximately 36,000 baht a month at current rates, which covers my rent, my food, my utilities, my health care, and leaves approximately 2,000 baht per month for anything else. The 62,000 in savings is the emergency fund, and the buffer, and the accumulation of what the ledger leaves, and I conserve it with the attention of a man who no longer makes individual line item decisions without running the total. I have not made a discretionary expenditure above 5,000 Australian dollars since 2022, which is the specific discipline available to a man who has seen what the absence of this discipline produces, and who has been convinced by the evidence, which is his own ledger. I walk to the beach every morning. I eat at the restaurant where Koh Samui brings me the dish I like, which costs me approximately 90 baht, and provides me approximately 45 minutes of something I would not trade for the boat. I see Roger on Tuesday evenings. Roger is in Koh Samui until he is not, which is the operating assumption for everyone here. And I have made peace with the transience of the community the way you make peace with a mine site roster. People come, people go. The site continues. I am the site. I continue. This is the site's status report. Green. The ledger is what it is. The morning is still the morning. I am going to tell you the ledger cost me 133,000 Australian dollars. And I am going to tell you I do not regret being here. And both of those things are true. And the truth of both of them simultaneously is what Koh Samui has taught me. And the teaching cost $133,000 and was, I have decided, worth the rate. Not the rate per line item. The rate for the whole ledger, closed. The ledger is complete. The mirror is closed. The boat is sold.